So again, to reminding ourselves that we are engaging in the Dharma because we want to find a better way, and that we, and recognizing that the Buddhas are the ones who have traveled the path before us, and we take refuge in them because we have great admiration, respect, love. We revere them because they are the ones and our teachers who are showing us the path. So we take refuge with that mindset, right? So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Next one, Paula, please. And then these are the 4 immeasurable thoughts that are kind of the basis for compassion and great compassion, which we'll talk about at some point in the Buddha Dharma, so that we have great compassion for all sentient beings and we want them to be free of suffering and have happiness just like we want it for ourselves. So how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free from closeness of attachment and distance of hatred. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to achieve Buddhahood. May they achieve Buddhahood. I myself will cause them to achieve Buddhahood. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free from suffering and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never separated from the happiness of higher rebirth and liberation. May they never be separated from these. I myself will cause them never to be separated from these. Please, Guru Deity, bless me to be able to do this. Thank you, Paula. So this is the, I don't know how many of you have taken the Discovering Buddhism classes, but the Mind and Its Potential, this class, which this particular one lasts 4 weeks, is the first one, the first module in a series of 12 or 13, depending on how you count. And the reason it's the first one in the beginning is because really it's the basis. It creates a foundation for all the other modules that come after this, right? And because Buddhism is sometimes His Holiness says, or other teachers say, the Buddhism is really about the science of the mind, right? More than any other tradition, Buddhism really attacks what we experience, how it affects our daily lives, and not just daily lives, but past lives, future lives, how to get past it, not just in this life, but forever, how to bring others with us to, lasting happiness. All those things is what Buddhism is really about. It's really about transforming the mind, right? So if someone asked me, what is Buddhism? I would just say it's really about how philosophy and techniques on how to transform the mind, right? That's bottom line. That's really what it is. And so understanding the mind and its potential is really key to understanding everything else that Buddhism has to say. And so the mind is a source of all our experience, right? Because as you know, whatever we feel, whatever we think, whatever we do in our actions of body, of speech, and our thoughts, all those really come from the mind. It's basically what is going on inside our minds, right? And so therefore, the mind is really the source of whatever harm we cause, whatever good we do, whatever virtuous actions we engage in. All that comes from our mind. And so subduing the mind, making it calmer, more peaceful, not reactive, and so forth and so on, is really the key to subduing the harmful tendencies, right? And as we will see, if some in this will glance over it, and some in this module, but certainly much more in later modules, that the harmful tendencies in our minds is the root of all our suffering, right? I mean, what is suffering? It's it's basically, getting things that we don't want, right? And not getting things that we want. That's essentially what suffering is, right? So, having being in a relationship that's not going well, that's something we don't want. And not getting something we want, maybe a promotion or something like that, right? Wealth and so forth and so on. All these things is really the cause of suffering, right? And the mind is the root of it, right? And that's really what this module is about. How it's at the root of it, and the fact that we can change it. It's not written in stone. All of us can overcome the dukkha. The suffering is English translation. It's not a very good translation, to be honest, from Sanskrit. And it's really a combination of disappointments, and a lot of it has to disappointment, dissatisfaction. I think that's a good way, what dukkha really is, but we translate it as suffering, so we'll go with that, right? So it's not written in stone that our lives have to be filled with suffering, and that we have to continually, come back life after life and really, have the same kind of suffering, or maybe even worse, depends, right? But we can change it, right? Because we can transform our minds, we can remove these harmful tendencies, and we can become better people, calmer people, more peaceful people, more compassionate people, more generous people, more whatever, add your adjective, right? Just, and make the world a better place, because our actions have effects on others around us, and, it just spreads like that, right? So, and the discovering Buddhism and other, study that you do in Buddhism basically provide just reliable and proven methods. I mean, that's really what, at the end of the day, right, whatever texts you read, whatever teachings you go to, when I say you, I mean one goes to, whatever tantric initiations one gets, whatever practices one does, whatever prayers one makes, all of those things at the end of the day are just different methods with which to transform our minds. That's bottom line, right? And we just have many different methods, I don't know, millions probably of different methods in Buddhism, because not everything works for everyone, right? I mean, not every size clothing, fits everyone. So similarly, there are lots of different methods for different types of people, that their, predispositions are, they're attracted to, right? Some things work for me, some things work for you. I kind of like that. So, but it's all about transforming the mind, right? By the way, I didn't mention this. If you have any questions, you can, feel free to ask them. This is not a lecture, right? So feel free to ask them anytime you wish. You can raise your hand if Paula sees your hand, then she can interrupt me, or you can put something in the chat box, a question in the chat box. And I'm not very good at looking at the chat box because I'm in my own mind, while I'm talking. But hopefully Paula will see it, and then she can, tell me, what the question is, and I can answer it, right? And I'll try to stop in various places in between and ask whether you have any questions. So you'll get a chance, if you have any questions, to ask it during that time too. So I mentioned before that Buddhism is the science of the mind, right? His Holiness is the one who said that. I'm just quoting him. And so what does that mean, right? So when the Buddha, under the, when he first started exploring this, and this is before he even went to the forest and, left, if you know the story, left the palace where he was, imprisoned basically, and, went to the forest, etc., to start his ascetic practices. Even before that, while he was at the palace, he started wondering why, what does everyone want, right? I mean, all of us wants to be happy, right? I mean, and not have suffering, right? So that means basically we want to get what we want, and we want to not get what we don't want, right? So hopefully you can parse that. So that's really bottom line. All of us, at the end of the day, that's what we're really looking for, right? And His Holiness said once, or yes, I think His Holiness said once, and it stuck with me, which is that, every being, every human being, every insect, every animal, every fish, every whatever, at every moment, the action that it is taking, right, is because it thinks that action is going to bring happiness in the next moment. That's really, if you think about it, that's really every action is for that reason, right? Because we think what we're doing, whether harmful or whether virtuous, is going to bring us happiness, right? So, if we cut off somebody in traffic, it's because it's going to make us happy that we're going to get wherever we're going faster. Or maybe we're, annoyed by the guy, so we decide we get back at him, and that's going to make me happy, right? Or, even, and we'll talk about this later, even virtuous actions, like generosity, etc. We do because it's going to make us happy. It's also going to make someone else happy, right? If we give money to the center or give money to poor person, certainly it's going to make them happy, but it also has, there's something for us in it as well, right? Or we do it because we know that we can gather merit that way, and that's going to bring us future happiness. So that's a bigger aspiration, right? But that's a kind of a little bit of a different thing. But nevertheless, everything that we do is really about bringing us happiness, right? So then the question that the Buddha asks is, what is real happiness, right? What does it mean to say, I want to be happy? So, and that requires understanding what we depend on to bring us happiness, right? So we think, we, ordinary beings, right? Not beings who have gained insight into the true nature of reality. Those are not ordinary beings, but we ordinary beings who are just living our daily lives and, still have clouded judgment and clouded minds. We think that external objects, external stimuli, external people, they're the ones who bring us happiness, right? So my spouse or my parents or my wealth, my bank account, my stature, my reputation, whether or not I get praised. That's what we believe brings us happiness, right? And that's what we strive for. We want more praise. So we try to do things that please the boss, or we want, better reputation. So, we will do things that, people will think more highly of us, and so forth and so on, right? So we believe, so in our mindset, we think that those kind of external things are going to bring us happiness. The problem is, as none of this is rocket science, this, that, that kind of happiness doesn't last, right? It's kind of like, their example, the classic example they give, like some of the lamas in the West give, is, eating ice cream, right? I mean, you have this, take a first bite, oh, it's so wonderful, right? Take the second, take the third, it's still really pleasant, right? But after the 10th one, it's kind of gotten a little, boring in a way, and by the 30th one, and you're probably too full and you're starting to feel kind of miserable, right? Or, you got, so it dissipates, right? Whatever happiness we have. And that's the problem with happiness from all external, that are dependent on external things. Because they don't last, right? And there are many reasons for that. And I won't go into that so much here, but from experience that, those happiness, happiness doesn't last. So for example, what is that quote from Shantideva? Rising and then falling, meeting. Accumulation ends in dispersal. Rising ends in falling, meeting ends in parting, birth ends in death, right? So that's the quote from, Shantideva's text. Actually, it's not from Shantideva's text. It's from it's from a sutra. It's from one of the Vinaya sutras. But anyway, so, everything ends, right? So accumulation, wealth or possessions, ends in dispersal. Right? Somebody else is going to get it, or somebody else is going to steal it, or somebody's going to inherit it, right? So accumulation ends in dispersal. Rising ends in falling, right? So rising in stature rising, they say how the mighty have fallen, right? So that saying. So, whatever goes up comes down. So rising ends in falling. Meeting ends in parting. So, we meet friends, we lose track of them, they lose track of us because of circumstances, or they die, or we die. Same with, relationships, and, meeting ends in parting. So, and then birth ends in death, right? That's the final end, if you will. So, and that quote is usually used for, when we meditate on impermanence, and which is another module of this, Discovering Buddhism series. But it's also an applicable in this context, which is that, rising ends and falling. I mean, we gather wealth because we think it's going to bring us happiness, but it doesn't last, right? Similarly, meeting ends in parting, birth ends in death, and the other one that I mentioned, I can't remember what now. So, so that's what the Buddhists realized, is that, we depend only on external things. But if you want pure and lasting happiness, right? Then the only way to do that is really by changing the way our mind operates, right? I mean, the reason we want external things is because our mind is clouded. I mean, we all, and we'll talk about this in more detail later, but, we all have the Buddha nature, right? I mean, it's not that we are somehow have to, gain something higher to become, enlightened or Buddhas or become Bodhisattvas and so forth and so on. That pure mind is within us already, it's just clouded with a lot of detritus. It's, the example they use is like the blue sky. That's always there, regardless, right, of a cloudy day or a sunny day. I mean, the blue sky is always there. It just so happens that on a cloudy day, you can't see it. But doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? I mean, so when the clouds part, when we slowly subdue our minds, the more and more of that Buddha nature appears to us. And that's how we attain, our final goal, full enlightenment for us and for others. So, and that's the pure and lasting happiness. They say that the Buddhas go from bliss to bliss, right? They don't, their minds don't have, they don't feel any unhappy, they're in a constant state of bliss, right? I don't want to use the word happiness because it's kind of, happiness, in English at least, we think that it means like, pleasure or, so forth and so on, but they're just in a constant state of bliss, constant state of joy. So, and that's the mind that we all have. That's but our minds are just clouded right now. So, and that's and that's why it's called pure. I mean, it's not just lasting happiness, because lasting happiness means not only are we not subject to karma, bad actions, the result of bad actions or previous bad actions, and we won't commit any bad actions anyway. We will only do virtuous things. So that brings us lasting happiness not only in this life, but for all lives to come, right? I mean, it's a pretty amazing concept when you think about it, because I mean, you will take a life. I mean, you will, come back as, taking some life. Only, the Buddhas the Buddhas come to earth, or Buddhas, appear to beings in certain forms only because, you know, they're spontaneously, they manifest themselves for the benefit of others, right? They don't need to, you know, they're beyond birth and death. So they don't need to, you know, they don't need to be here, you know. The only reason they're here and then we're able to see them, like, you know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for example, or other lamas that I'm, you know, sure were enlightened. The only reason they appeared is because I don't have the, you know, I don't have the karma to see them in their true form, you know, their you know, anyway, I won't go into the bodies of the Buddha, but, you know, so I'm not able to see them, at least in, you know, in the God realms where, you know, the Buddhas are always teaching. I mean, the realms of the Buddhas where they're always teaching and so forth and so on, right? So if they don't, you know, so that's why they appear. So, you know, it's an amazing concept to think that, you know, we can purify our minds to such a level that, you know, we're beyond sorrow, we're beyond birth and death, and we're, you know, you know, our minds will be endless. Our minds will, you know, can see everything, you know, can see the past, can see the future, can see other people's karma, right? What they did in the past and what, you know, why they're suffering in this life, because, you know, you can make the direct correlation, you know. So all that is possible if we subdue our mind in a progression. You know, of course, if we subdue our mind in this life, maybe, you know, maybe you might be enlightened, but I know I won't be, you know, just by subduing my mind in this life. I need to do more work. But over time, you know, over many lives, one can get to that point, right? But it's all about the mind, and that it is the one stable and valid basis for real happiness. You know, nothing else will get us there. It's only us working on our minds diligently, continuously, you know, with joy, with enthusiasm, even on the worst days, and, you know, and practicing virtue and accumulating merit, and, you know, purifying our negative karma, you know, creating the seeds, you know, for being born in as a human being in the future life, so that we can continue to make progress. You know, all that stuff is all about, you know, transforming our mind so that we can get there, right? So that's really what Buddhism is about. That's the science of the mind, is that what are all the things, I mean, why is it that we suffer? What can we do to overcome our suffering? And the technique, you know, and all the techniques and methods with which we can do that, right? That's really what Buddhism is about. And of course, to bring, you know, the same, to teach others, to show them the path of, you know, this, of what we gain, right? Whatever merit or whatever realizations we gain in the path, we want to bring others with us, right? So that's the other aspect of that, not just techniques and methods for our own pure and lasting happiness, but pure and lasting happiness for everyone else. Because when we understand how much they suffer, I mean, how much we suffer, we also get an understanding of how much they suffer and why they should, you know, we should help them come along with us, right? I mean, they say that you cannot gain, you cannot get realizations on compassion for others unless one truly gets a realization of renunciation, right? Why our suffering is so horrendous, and getting, you know, they call it disgust, a disgust for the pleasures of this life, right? Only then can we understand our own suffering, how we suffer, and only then can we understand how others suffer, and that is the basis for compassion for others, right? So obviously we have to work on ourselves before we can help any others, right? So so anyway, so that's our minds that we need to work on, and using the techniques that the teachers advise us to do, things to do, and also to the teachings and the Lamrim and the sutras and the Buddha's teachings, that all the things that they lay out, right, for us. I think it's a good place to stop for now. Any questions on what I've said so far? No?
I don't have anything in chat.
Oh, let me look at the chat.
No, not.
Oh, I see. Okay, very good. So so then let's dive into so we talked about why the mind being the basis for stable and lasting happiness, why we want that everyone wants happiness and not want suffering, and so forth and so on, right? But the question then is, what is the mind, right? And this brings a kind of a not a controversial, but well, anyway. So the question then is the mind the same as the brain, right? So there's a classic mind-brain debate that's been going on among philosophers and certainly among scientists, and especially those who are studying Buddhist thought and etc. So the question is the mind the same as the brain? And what I'll say is what it says from the Buddhist point of view, right? From a Buddhist point of view, the mind can't be the same. Well, the mind isn't the same as the brain, because if it were so, there would be no basis for anything other than the pleasures of this life, right? I mean, it's kind of an, there's no reason for, morality. There's no reason for altruism. There's no reason for compassion. There are no cause and effect, there's no downsides to, so it's a hedonistic, life, if you will. The brain is just, from the Buddhist point of view, the brain is basically an organ, right? Like we have eyes, we have a nose that smells, and an eye that, sees, and so forth and so on. The brain is just a physical thing that, it's like the liver, right? It's just a part of us that we need to function. The mind is really much more, the mind encompasses much, much more than what we think of as the brain, right? So then from the Buddhist point of view, the mind is beginningless, right? The mind is endless. So in other words, my mind happens to, when I think of myself, the, Shankha, the I, right? The mind, that's the mind essentially. Or it's a combination of the mind and my body, right? When I think of myself as Shankha, it's the face that I'm looking at right now on my screen, and along with the body, and what I think of as my mind, that whole, that complex, the mind body, that's really what I think of as myself. And this, that's just for this life, right? I mean, in this life, I happen to look like, look like I do, with 2 arms and 2 legs, and, I'm a biped, and so forth and so on. But my mind, even after this life, will continue. And it'll, be part of some other body, or it'll be associated with some other body, right, in the next life. And it was with some other body in the previous life. So, but that mind that continues from life to life is beginningless, and it's endless. So you can't say that there's one point where it started. And there's a meditation, you know, called the continuity of the mind. We'll do, in, you know, probably the next session to kind of investigate that. So the mind is beginningless, it's endless, it's indestructible, right? So, you know, it's not like Voldemort's Horcruxes, you know, you can't just get, you know, destroy them with some kind of tooth of a snake or whatever the heck that thing was. So it continues, and, you know, it encompasses all our past and future lives. It's you know, it holds the seeds of all our, you know, the cause and effect, you know, when our virtuous deeds create positive you know, seeds, and negative deeds create negative you know, tendencies in our minds, right? So it holds that, you know, holds all that, you know, and it's the source for all our virtuous actions, right? Morality, generosity, patience, you know. If you know about the six perfections, you know, all those things are, you know, are flow from the mind. So clearly you can see it's much more than just a brain, right? And one way to think about it is when you know, you can think about it like this. When we say my mind, right? When I say my mind, do I think it means my brain? No. Right? I mean, you can try it yourself, right? I mean, if I, you know, if you say my mind, you don't mean my brain, because otherwise you would say my brain, right? My brain thinks, you know, my, you know, you know, when you say I think, you really mean my mind thinks. You're not saying my brain thinks. You know, my brain felt, you know, disappointment, or my brain was really happy, you know, and so forth and so on, right? I mean, we think of it in a much bigger way than the brain, right? So it's important to make that distinction. And in fact, when you see people, when you see teachers, especially Tibetan teachers, you know, when they talk about the mind, they don't, you know, they point at their heart, right? So there's a kind of a, you know, it feels like the mind resides somewhere not up here, but somewhere here, right? Well, you can't see, but I'm pointing at my heart. So, so that's the mind that we're talking about, right? So each of us has the mind like that goes from life to life, endless, beginningless, indestructible, and so forth and so on. That is, in its basic nature, is pure. But our perception of what that mind is at this moment is not like that, because of, you know, karmic habitual tendencies, karmic seeds we've created that cloud our judgment, that cloud, you know, that it's kind of like, well, I'll go into that later, but basically it clouds our judgment. You know, it's like you know, they call it adventitious stains. You know, that's sometimes you'll see in texts, they'll say adventitious stains of the mind. Our current, what we see, how we see our minds is really has these, you know, stains from our karmic past, right? These have, you know, karma basically is really, you know, karma in Sanskrit just means action. You know, that's really, you know, it's you know, it comes from the same root. The root is kri, and the same root is actually creation, to create. In you know, in Greek and then later in English. So it just means to, you know, to do something, you know, whether it's a body, whether it's a speech, or whether it's a mind. It's just, that's all it is, right? So that's all karma means. But what it does do from a Buddhist point of view is that every action creates, you know, tendencies in our mind stream. They call them, you know, so it's like habitual tendencies, creates habits, right? So if we are likely, if we get angry often, we create this, you know, we are likely to get more angry more often, right? It creates this kind of condition. And you know this from your experience just in this life, right? You know, we talk about patterns in relationships, or grooves in the, you know, they call it now, they talk about grooves in our brain, right? That if you have certain thought patterns, you know, creates these grooves in our brain. So the neurons travel down that same path, and you basically have the same, you know, you go down the same rat hole, basically, right? And they talk, you know, and modern psychology, psychotherapy talks about ways of, you know, creating new grooves, right? New patterns, right? So your neurons go in a different direction so that the old groove is no longer as deep, and, you know, and so forth and so on. So that's really what karma is. It's just habitual tendencies. If you do a lot of killing, you know, you are, you know, you're prone to do more killing. And actually, not only that, and when you get to the karma section of Discovering Buddhism, there's a lot of other things. You know, you get results that are similar to the cause, so that you're likely to be also be killed or die at someone else's hands, and so forth and so on. So you know, so those are the kind of things that happen, right? Or and conversely, of course, you know, if you are patient, you know, you create the causes for having, if you are, you know, have ethical behavior, then you create the causes of having a human birth. If you have, you know, you're patient, then you create the causes for having a beautiful body, and so forth and so on, right? So virtuous actions, of course, also have, you know, good things that come in the future. So that's really the mind that we're talking about, right? It's the stream, the mind stream that continues on, you know, from past lives to future lives. And also not just that, from the time we're born to the time, you know, like the mind that we have today is not the same mind that we had when we came out of our mother's womb, right? It's not the same mind that we had when we were teenagers. It's not the same mind we had when we were in our 30s, you know, and 40s, and, you know, even yesterday. So so it's this continuous thing that it's beginningless, endless, that continues, and keeps going, and it's okay. So I'm going to stop there for the moment. And somebody had a question, I noticed. What are the 6 perfections? Oh, okay. Well, somebody already answered. Okay, great. In any case, so that's the mind that I'm talking about, right? And so then but it's still kind of a little vague, right? I mean, you know, a thing goes from, you know, past to, you know, future, and blah, blah, blah. So of course, as with everything in Buddhism, there's a definition, right? So the definition of the mind is that which is clear and knowing. Okay. So both things have to be there, right? So in other words, knowing here does not mean knowing intellectually, but rather as an awareness. So the mind is something that is aware, right? It's aware of, it can, you know, it's aware of, you know, the senses, you know, the sense, you know, so there's, okay, I'll just preface that by saying that, you know, when we talk about the mind, we're really talking about the mental consciousness here, right? So, so in Buddhism, however, it's not just the mental, we have 6 different consciousnesses, actually. There's, of course, the mental consciousness, which we normally think of as the mind, but there's also the 5 sense consciousnesses, right? So there's the, you know, consciousness of smell, consciousness of taste, consciousness of touch, consciousness of hearing, and consciousness of whatever else other one is, right? So So those are the 5 sense consciousnesses, which are not the same as our nose and our eyes and so forth and so on, right? So the eye is basically the eye organ, which essentially is what enables us to see, right? That's really all the eye organ is, or the tongue organ is, or our skin organ is, or our ear organ is, right? But those are not, so the consciousness is somewhere behind, the organ kind of not interfaces, but, organ engages with the world, and then then there's a consciousness that then makes sense of it, right? So the sense consciousnesses, they say that the eye organ, for example, when I see Paula's picture here, let's say, right? She's wearing a red sweater. If I look at her, when my eye consciousness sees her, it does not see a red sweater. It just sees red, right? In fact, it just sees a color that we all agree is red. Really, that's what it is, right? The eye consciousness does not. It's just aware of the redness, right? It's the mental consciousness at the next instant after the eye consciousness is relayed to the mental consciousness. That the mental consciousness, because it knows what red looks like, and because we have all agreed that that's called red and not green, and because it's a sweater, I instantly recognize it as a red sweater, right? So there's just 5 consciousnesses that essentially all they do is just, I don't know how to explain it, but basically all they do is just kind of engage with the world. That's it, right? Everything else, all the conceptual stuff that happens afterward, all the labeling, all the judgments, all the I like, dislike, all that stuff, right, happens in the mental consciousness, right? So those are the 6 consciousnesses, right? And so that's what we're talking about when we say mind. So there's 6, if you will, minds, although when we normally talk about mind, we're really talking about the mental consciousness. But all these consciousnesses, they are non-conceptual, right? In other words, they directly perceive what's happening, right? What's in front of us, right? And in fact, that's why they call, consciousness for direct perception. The mind is our mental consciousness is the only one that's capable of conceptual thought, right? So the other ones are not able to, they can only have direct perception. Our mental consciousness is the only one that not only can have, direct perception, but also but also of conceptual thought, right? Of discriminating, of having, they call it, of liking, disliking, I like red, I don't like red, I don't like green, whatever else, all those kinds of things, right? So they're called, so those are the ones that are clear and they're knowing, right? So knowing, that's what knowing here means, is like being aware of, to perceive, to be aware, right? So it's an awareness. So that's what the mind is. And the other, the other attribute other than knowing is that it's clear. It's an attribute of clarity. And clarity here means that the mind is an awareness that just reflects the true mind, not the true mind, the nature of the mind. Because if you strip away all the conceptual stuff, is of one of clarity. What that means is the way to use the example, it just reflects what appears. It's like a mirror, and that's the example they give. The nature of the mind is like a mirror. It just reflects. It doesn't make any judgments. It doesn't say you look horrible or you look great. it just reflects exactly what appears in front of it, right? And that's the clarity that we are talking about. That's the clear and knowing part. Now you could say, okay, well, why isn't it enough to just say the mind is an awareness? Why do you have to say it's clear? Isn't that just assumed? Well, that's actually not true, because an example they gave in the text, for example, is that, if you have jaundice, a white mountain can look yellow, right? Well, that's a deceptive mind, right? That is not clear. That is not reflecting what is appearing. In fact, it has a color. I don't mean color as in the red-green color, but rather it colors what it's, what they're wearing. It changes, right? It's not giving you it's not showing you the white mountain. It's actually giving you a deceptive view of the white mountain because of yellow, because of certain things that are going on in the mind, right? So that's not clarity. That's a deceptive mind, right? So that's why there are these two attributes. It has to be an awareness. In other words, it has to be able to perceive the world, what appears in front of it, and it has to be of clarity, right? It has to reflect it in an unadulterated way, right? There's also another attribute they talk about called luminosity, which basically means that it's, anyway, we won't go there. But so clear, and so so the mind is basically that which is clear and knowing. That's basically that's exact definition that they give in the texts. And that's so that's the pure awareness. So, the mind that we see, like the mind, if I close my eyes and I just breathe for a second, the mind that I see, in my, is not the pure awareness that is clear and knowing. Because, there's so many distractions, stimuli and distractions, that my mind is, it's like they talk about like the waves of an ocean, right? The waves of, an ocean, even without a storm, there's always these waves, this constant, distractions, is constant, the froth, all that, it's turbulent, right? It's this way and that, like the monkey mind, right? So it's like that. It's constantly going this way, that way. There's always something coming, like coming and then going to the next one and the next one, like that, right? But the pure awareness is like deep in the ocean, right? Deep in the ocean, it's calm. Right? It's calm, clear water, right? So the top of the ocean might be quite turbulent, but you go down a few hundred feet, maybe a few thousand feet, whatever it happens to be, it's actually very, very calm. So that's what our minds are the pure, the nature of our minds is like, and I'm not going to go to ultimate nature and conventional nature, but nevertheless, that's what the nature of our mind, is that is the pureness, the clarity, and, clarity of our mind. The other example they use also is like like a glacial lake, for example, right? You go, if you go in the Sierras, well, anyway, I used to live in California, so I used to, that's the, I used, that's the, what image that it comes to me. But, if you go in the Sierras, some of the lakes, at 9,000 feet, let's say, something like that, it's amazing, right? It's absolutely like a mirror, right? If you can see, if you take a picture, you can't tell the reflection, is which one is upside down, right? You can't, so our minds, the pure nature of minds is like that. It reflects exactly what appears, and reflects exactly what appears. All the other stuff that happens, which happens today in our minds, is all stuff that we add on top of that, right? And so transforming our minds is all about peeling an onion, layer after layer after layer after layer of, detritus, of karmic tendencies, of stains, from our past deeds, from, of mistaken concepts of how things exist and all that stuff. So it's all about removing layer after layer until we can get to that depth of the ocean where it's clear, or the glacial lake, right? And that's the Buddha's mind. And that's the subtle nature, the subtle nature of our minds. There's a gross nature and a subtle nature, and then there's a very subtle nature they talk about, right? Maybe I'm going a little too far right now, but anyway, it's okay, I'll talk about it. But so there's the gross nature, which is the nature that we are all, we are all aware of, or we see today, when we inspect our mind. So that's the gross nature, what we see. There's a subtle nature, which is the clear mind that I was talking about. And then there's a very subtle mind, which is the mind that goes from life to life, right? That's the mind that one experiences at the time of death. Actually, if you want to be technical, you actually experience it 3 times in your life. There are only 3 occurrences or 3 times in your life that you can actually experience a subtle nature of mind, which is, other than at the time of death, is when you sneeze, and at the time of orgasm. So those are the only 3 times that one can actually, if one has enough, one is able to separate oneself during sneezing, let's say, to be able to inspect it at that moment, at the moment of the sneeze happening, you might be able to see the nature of your, the subtle nature of your mind. But in any case, so anyway, so the very subtle nature of mind is the one that goes from life to life. So that's the one that holds the karmic tendencies and so forth and so on. So all of our efforts is to get us close to the clear, the clear light nature of mind, which is the very subtle mind. It's like a clear light, and the reason they call it clear light is because, well, anyway, there are various stages of death. In the death process, that's the last one that appears. It appears like clear light. If you are able to concentrate on that at the time of death, it appears as clear light. So that's the clear light nature of the mind. Let me see. And so the subtle mind, so that's the subtle conscience, the very subtle conscience that I was talking about, that's beginningless, endless, and so forth and so on. And it's totally free from distractions, from confusion, from mistaken concepts, all that stuff, right? It's the conceptual mind that takes over at the instant after we directly perceive something, right? With our mental consciousness, like I mentioned, the minute I see, Paula's picture here, right? The first instant, all I see is, something I call a head, something I call a sweater, that happens to be something I call red, and so forth and so on, right? That's the first instant. of what my mind sees or mind perceives. I don't want to say sees because that's the icon. I mean, just the mind is aware of, right? At the very next instant, conceptual thought takes over. So the very next instant, I say, oh, that's Paula, right? And that's the, and so, and from that appears everything else. Oh, I like Paula, I don't like Paula, you know? I like the red sweater, no, the red sweater looks horrible. Or, you know, all these other things. Oh, Paula did this to me yesterday, you know, so I don't like her, you know, or whatever else. All those things come immediately after, right? And there's some more subtlety to it about how I decide that she's Paula and not Barbara, for example. I'm not going to go into that at the moment, but nevertheless, all this happens at the second instant, right? So the mind, when it perceives, there's three things that have to happen. One is that you know, the mental consciousness has to engage with the object, and the mental consciousnesses, and then it has, you know, how we perceive the object is dependent, you know, so it has to come into contact with the previous moment of consciousness. So what is the state of the previous moment of consciousness? And then the object, and the subject, which is the mental consciousness. Those three things, once they arise, you know, lead to all our perceptions. So, so that's kind of how it works. I mean, I'm actually you know, I mean, some of these things are, you know, actually relatively complex topics. So I'm kind of glossing over them here. But that's basically how our minds work. And if we are able to stay in the direct perception level, right, that level where I just perceive what appears in front of me without all these likes and dislikes and so forth and so on, then you know, that's the pacification of the mind we're talking about, right? It's the mind that doesn't engage in all these likes and dislikes and doesn't engage in the judgments, you know, doesn't engage in all the other things that we're all, you know, we aware of, which lead to all the, you know, the next set of actions, right? Actions of thought, you know, actions of speech, you know, actions of the body. You know, all those things arise from that second instant, from that conceptual thought. So if we are able to not go into that conceptual thought, or are able to create a gap between the instant of perception and when we go into conception, we have a chance of changing which path we want to go down, right? It's, you know, right now I have this very, very, very deep groove cut in my mind that the minute I see, you know, a person or anything for that matter, I'm using person as an example, I immediately will go down the path of labeling that person, seeing that person as a permanent thing, a permanent being, and then judgment, labeling, feeling, you know, all the stuff that happens based on that person. So for example, you know, if I see someone who looks like my wife, Deirdre, I label her immediately Deirdre. You know, then the conceptual thoughts about whether I love her or not, whether she's, you know, she's pissed off at me or not, or whether I'm pissed off at her, or she was nice to me or not nice to me, or here's, you know, why, you know, whatever, all those things, right? And all conceptual things like the fact that I see her as permanent, right? I don't see her, you know, I don't see her as ever leaving me. I don't ever see her as dying. I don't ever see her as changing, right? You know, like I remember, like I think many years ago, I remember I was at maybe it was Venerable Robina. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it was Venerable Robina's teaching. And she talked about how, she had heard, some student had said, that, he or she was in a relationship, and the other person came and said, oh, you're a different person than I married or met or whatever, right? I mean, like, this is not the person I married, right? Well, of course not, right? I mean, I'm not the person I was just a second ago, right? Or the time, when an hour and 11 minutes ago when we started this class. So why would you expect, the person to be the same as when you married, but of course we don't see it. We don't see it like that, right? I mean, so I see my wife as unchanging, my children as like, I have a view of them as, so anyway, you know what I mean? So, so all that stuff appears, at the second, third instant, right? Which is the root of course, of all our, all our suffering, if you will, right? It can be the root of our joy, but again, they call it contaminated. It's called contaminated virtue, something like that. I can't remember now, but any action that is that we engage in from the conceptual mind is adulterated to some degree. Even the most generous, the generosity, all this other stuff, it of course is virtue. There's still, positive merit and et cetera involved in that, but it's not pure virtue because there is still an element of the self in it, right? It's only when we have erased the ego, from our conceptual thought, and when we're in touch with our subtle nature of mind, is when pure virtue arises, right? So in other words, there was another example of Venerable Rina gave once, I remember, this must have been 20 years ago, but anyway, she was talking about love, so in some of the Tibetan scriptures, they talk about the only truly selfless love is the love that a mother feels for her child. I don't know if it's the same love that a father feels for his child, but we won't go there. But at least what the Tibetan scriptures say, that it's the love that a mother feels for a child, because she will do anything, including sacrificing herself and her body for the sake of the child. All other love is adulterated to some degree. And the way Venerable Rina put it at the time, I remember this, and it stuck with me, is that it's love that we feel towards someone who is willing to love us back, right? So that's a self part of it. In other words, I feel love for someone as long as he or she loves me. But if he or she leaves me, I no longer feel love for that person. And that's the kind of not the proof, but the reasoning that backs up that understanding is that, if we truly feel love for the person, it wouldn't matter whether or not the person loved us back, right? And that's why we grow to dislike or detest our our ex-spouses and so forth and so on. That love didn't exist because that person did something or left or whatever it was that no longer was in our self, didn't satisfy ourself, not ourselves, but ourself. And so we stopped loving that person, right? So that's why love is even virtue, which is love is a virtue, right? Is still adulterated to some degree because it doesn't come from the pure nature of our mind, because we haven't realized the pure nature of our mind. And so until then, we are still under karmic tendencies and mistaken concepts of how the self exists and reality exists. And because of that, all our actions, even the virtuous ones, are, to some degree, the virtuous ones, but certainly the non-virtuous ones are adulterated, but to some degree because of the mistaken concept of ourself, right? If we're able to overcome that concept of the self, and understand how it truly exists, then we would not be, we would get in touch with that pure nature, right? And so that's the whole point, that all the when you go to the other classes and when you read the Lam Rim and you read the scriptures, they constantly go on and on about the nature of the self and so forth and so on. That's why until we realize, have a direct perception of the nature of the self, we are under the power of karma and delusions and so forth and so on, right? So everything, all of this clouds our potential for love, for compassion, for generosity, for joyful effort, enthusiasm, in making progress. Everything that we engage in. And as I said, our view, and because of these concepts, our view of reality is totally mistaken, right? That's why it's called, if you've attended some other classes, they talk about ignorance being the root of all of our unhappiness, of all our suffering or disappointments, right? Is ignorance. What does ignorance mean? It means that it doesn't mean not knowing. It means thinking something. It means, in this case, in Buddhist thought, it's, as Rinpoche says, it's being mistaken in how something exists. And not just that, it's opposite. It's a belief in the opposite of how things exist. But not just that, it's actually believing it to be true. In other words, how we see ourself, how I see Shankha, how I see me, is totally opposite of how Shankha exists in this world. But not just that, I am absolutely 100% convinced that how I see myself is reality. So both those things are really important. One is having the mistaken view, and then believing in the mistaken view, right? So that's the view that's totally mistaken, that gives rise to all these concepts after the direct perception that our mental consciousness has. And all the stuff appears, the grasping, the pushing away, being repulsed by something, and so forth and so on. All that stuff, anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, the three poisons or the 6 poisons, depending on how, which list you use, all that stuff arises from that ignorance, which comes from that conceptual mind that arises after the first moment of consciousness, right? So that's that's what we're grappling with here. And, this is stuff that we have, accumulated over endless lives, or since beginningless time. So it's deep within us. And that's why it takes a great amount of effort to, be free from these judgment, from these projections, from these, from these conceptual thoughts. But all of us have that innate potential, right? That's the Buddha nature we're talking about, right? The one that is always is in bliss, right? So we can change all this, and that's the potential. The name of this module is Mind and Its Potential. So this is the mind we have now, but the potential is, limitless. That's what it's about. So it's 8:20 now. I talked about the gross and subtle minds. And well, the only last thing is, and this is not, again, rocket science, the way to simplify our minds, to pacify our minds, to create that gap between the first instant and the second instant of conceptual thought, or reaction, as we call, as we also call it, reactive mind, is meditation, of course, right? I mean, that as we understand our minds better and better, and maybe the last class I'll do the meditation on the actual mind observing the mind, which is a very, very interesting, it's a really enlightening meditation. But anyway, the mind, meditating on the mind. But in any case, the more we are aware of how our minds work, the better we are able to create that gap between being aware of something and reacting to something, right? And which is the basis for compassion, for love, and so forth and so on, is because we have such reactive minds, is that we're not, which it's like animals, it's instinctual, right? I mean, how we engage with the world is just instinctual. So that's pretty much all I had to say for today. So what I wanted to do before we end is, first of all, is there anyone here who has, okay, first of all, before we go there, does anyone have any questions about anything that I spoke about?
Sorry, Shankha, there's a lady who's asked,
okay.
And I put it in your chat.
Question, okay. One goal of Buddhism, from my understanding, is to try to develop the mind. How does that apply to the conceptual and subtle mind and the relationship between the two? Okay, good question.
That's from Iphasia.
I'm sorry, I can't see.
There's a lady called Iphasia.
Oh, right. Okay, Iphasia. Yes, I see her picture. One goal of Buddhism is, from the understanding, that is to try to develop the mind. How does that apply? So developing the mind here really is about understanding how our mind works, how the conceptual mind works, right? How the mind that we have today, in its current state, how that works, because we're not even aware of it. I'm not aware of my mind 99.9% of the time during the day, right? I am not, absolutely not, right? The only 0.1% of the time that I am aware of it is when in the morning when I do my meditation. That's it, right? But if I were more diligent and if I did it more, I could increase it to 99 I could, increase it from 0.1% to 0.2%. So that's the developing, to understanding how the mind works during our daily lives, right? So that's developing the mind, understanding how the conceptual mind works. And as we understand more and more of how the conceptual mind works, we also peeling layers, as I said, layers of an onion, right? Our minds are, if you think of the pure nature, the pure mind, the subtle mind, the very subtle mind, as the core of the, whatever the thing inside, all the way the inside of the onion is, and then you have all the stuff built up around it because of all the karmic tendencies we have created over, endless, beginningless lives. Every time that we are engaging in meditation and understanding our conceptual mind, we are removing one more layer. So as we remove one more layer, we're getting closer and closer to that understanding the pure nature of our mind. And, and then there's various techniques to do that. There's the techniques that are laid out in the sutra tradition. There's techniques that are laid out in the tantric tradition that all are based on the same foundation. They just happen to use different methods to get there. And some are a little bit faster than the others, but that's about it. But all of them basically are all about just removing those layers one after the other. And that's really what developing the mind means, is getting in closer and closer, removing layer after layer, and getting, to the innermost the seed, right? Did that explain your question, Afisha?
Yep, that was good. Thank you.
Okay, very welcome. Did I pronounce your name correctly, by the way?
You did. Yes.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Okay, so then what I wanted to do, and I wanted to ask you before I end, is how many of you are new to meditation? That is, you have not meditated before. So, because then I would give you instruction on the posture and so forth and so on.
Perhaps people
Is there
can
anybody?
people can either unmute. I'm so sorry, Shankha. Either drop a line in chat or unmute yourselves.
Right. Okay. So then, so what I would, as part of the homework, so what I was going to say is, what I would ask you to do is, first of all, is read, the first chapter in the readings that's available in the materials link, right? Which is called, then the first one is called "What is the Mind" by His Holiness. And then, if you're able, in the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun, there's a short section about the mind from pages 75 to 82. So that might, the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun is secondary. If you are able to, please do so. It goes into a little bit of esoteric stuff in there because the audience was slightly different. And it was also many, many years ago at a different time. So it's a little different the way it's explained, but it might be interesting, just to get a background on what we're talking about and where we'll go. And finally, what I'd like you to do is, if you don't do it already, to please every morning for 5 minutes, even if that's all it is, but just to create the habit, we need to start somewhere, is for 5 minutes to do just a simple meditation on the breath, right? And what I ask is, please don't, have unless you're an accomplished meditator, it's best, and this is what the texts say, and this is what my teachers have told me, is it best to start with very, very short sessions, right? Even 2 minutes is okay, as long as it's a good session, right? That as long as you're able to keep the concentration on the breath, even if it's for 2 minutes, it's wonderful. But what I was told not to do is expand the length too quickly, right? So one gets excited that one is able to do it for 2 minutes, and then one immediately says, okay, let's do it for 10 minutes, right? The problem with that is, one has to begin slowly. So what they say in the beginning, you want to have many, but short. So in other words, you want to do short sessions, take a break. If you want to go longer, still keep it 2 minutes, take a break, do another 2 minutes, take a break, do another 2 minutes, take a break. What you want to do is have good sessions, the quality, not the quantity, right? And I'm not making this up, by the way. This is actual, what's been passed down for many, 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 many generations. So they say in the beginning to have short and many, right? Many sessions, but short. And by the way, when it means a break, it doesn't mean just, okay, get a cup of coffee, but stay within mindfulness, but just ease off on the concentration. You don't no longer have to concentrate on the breath, but it doesn't mean that you basically start thinking about the day and all this other stuff, right? So you can just relax the mind, but you don't get just totally distracted, but you're not concentrating on the breath yet. And then you go to another 2 minute session and so forth and so on. As one gets better at this, over time, the instruction is to make it longer. So each session is longer, and you have a fewer number of sessions, right? So you might have a 10 minute or 20 minute session, and then you take a 2 minute break, and then you do another 20 minute session, do a 2 minute break. And then as you get better at it, you do an hour-long session, take a 5 minute break, hour, like that, right? So you start with short sessions, but many, and you move on towards longer sessions, but few, right? So that's how one kind of does this, right? So what I suggest is if you would just, even if it's 2 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes, whatever, do that, and just keep it short. And stop, by the way, also very important, to stop when it's going well. Okay, that's the other instruction. So you don't want to do 3 2-minute sessions. In the last 2 minutes, your mind is really tired and you're just not able to concentrate. Because that just sets you up for feeling like, okay, I can't do it, and so forth and so on. What you want to do is end when it's going well, so that you're excited, you feel good about yourself, so you're going to come back and do it again. You are going to want to do it again, right? This is just basic psychology, but it happens to have been created 2,000 years ago. But anyway, so yeah, so that's the homework, and the next time when we start, today I didn't do a meditation just because we had the announcements and Charmaine's kind words. But next time when we start, we'll start with a 9-round breathing meditation if you're not, and I'll give instruction if you're not familiar with the 9-round breathing yet. Okay. Shall we do the dedication prayers, Paula? Unless someone has something to ask or say.
Shankha, I just had something quick just to add, because I know, and maybe others don't know, that you've spent a lot of time working with Venerable Renee, and that this kind of meditation is your passion. So it will be nice if you share some of that with us as we go along, I think.
Okay. Yes, I will.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, this is a particular type of meditation, concentration meditation called Shine meditation. There's Shamatha, there's concentration meditation and insight meditation, right? And they're also called Shamatha and Vipassana. So Shamatha is Shamatha is a Sanskrit word, Shine is the Tibetan word, which is basically about concentrating on an object to build one's concentration level to a point where one is able to hold the object here meaning like the breath, or a mental image of a picture, like the tanka behind me, having that mental image. This is what they do in Tantra as well, when they visualize the deity and all this other stuff. So to have, to be able to have that concentration meditation, and then one is able, but that's not the goal in itself, one is able to use that ability of effortless concentration then to gain realizations on the Lam Rim, for example, right? So if you're right now, when if I'm meditating on death, on the, of death, death is certain, time of death is uncertain, and at the time of death, nothing but the Dharma will help us, that stuff, right? My mind is distracted every 30 seconds. So, I have to keep bringing, I don't have the concentration to kind of gain the realizations that one needs, right? But if one is able to have the concentration, then you can use the death meditation as the object, and then you just make much, much faster progress, right? So that's concentration. That's why breath is such an wonderful way to, learn concentration, because, you don't have to think about anything. It's just something you are aware of all the time. And then the Shamatha, and then Vipassana, the insight meditation, is then you use the same concentrated meditation, and then you use to generate the wisdom that realizes emptiness, like to investigate the true nature of reality, right? And that's how one makes really quick progress, is through that, it just slices through whatever you are meditating on, right? That's what they use in the example they use in the text, it just slices through whatever the object is. So anyway, so that's, we'll talk about that. That's what the mind is about. Using the mind as an object, you can make really good progress on understanding how the mind works if one is able to have that concentration. Okay.
Shankha, may I obsess a little about materials?
Yeah.
You mentioned a text that is not in our list. You mentioned
the wish fulfilling golden sun.
No. What is the mind by his?
Oh no, that's just the first. That's just the first chapter in the teachings. The reading material, right? It's all in the materials list, right? It should be. It was there.
Can I just check? I've got it clear.
Materials.
May I tell you what's in the?
Yeah,
Paula, is this something that you can follow up with Shankha after the class, maybe?
Yes, but anyway, it's there in the Dropbox. If you go to the materials section, I'm there right now. You will see it says 01 DB readings 2007.pdf. So the first chapter in that is what I'm talking about. Is the thing about His Holiness.
Okay, that's all I wanted. I just wanted to be able to say to everybody that of all the materials we shared, that's the link. It's the 01 DB readings 2007. That's it.
Yes. Shall we finish with the prayers then? Let's just do only the first prayer because I'm already over, which is unfortunate. I'm sorry about that, but let's just do the first prayer and then we'll do the His Holiness and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and also Osol's long life prayer. So we'll skip the prayer of St. Francis. That's all I'm saying.
Coming up.
Okay. Yeah, skip that. Okay. So again, keeping in mind our motivation to not only attain enlightenment for our sake, but also for the sake of others. So make the prayer to seal our merit from this class. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparable kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And his Tenzin Osolhita, who is Lama Yeshe's incarnation in this life. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers at far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went over. I'll try to be more on time next time. And I'll see you next week.